welcome everybody to this wonderful event. And most importantly, happy Pride. Everybody give me a little happy Pride. There we go. That's great. My name is Cheryl Keaton. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the president of Pride in Our Workplace. And I have such a great time working with all of my colleagues at Pride in Our Workplace and all of our partners, our corporate partners, our community partners, trying to do our best to engage with LGBTQ employees and LGBTQ employers to create an environment where everybody can be themselves and everybody can thrive. And frankly, so that every company can thrive by getting the most out of all of their very happy employees. Thank you so much to our host, PTC. What an outstanding location. What a great view. Everybody, let's give it up for PTC. I'm going to take my mic and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to enjoy the show. Kameelah, Javier, Gavin, it's all yours. Have fun.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. And if you haven't made your way upstairs, please do so. I saw some folks just come down. It's pretty beautiful to be out there today. So super excited to be with you all. Of course, we're in the midst of a moment that we should be celebrating and super sort of inspired by, but it also continues to be a very challenging moment with lots of sort of tensions that we manage as individuals, as representatives of organizations and corporations. And so we're going to spend some time kind of leading into where we can sort of thrive and share support with each other, and where we have some challenges and we certainly don't have all of the answers, but we want to maybe start thinking through some of these questions together, and then invite you into the conversation as we do Q&A toward the end. But first, let's do some introductions. So I'm Kameelah Benjamin Fuller. I am the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Social Impact Officer at PTC. I've been here about 3 years, be 3 years in the fall. And if you haven't been here before, it's a pretty cool company. We do lots of interesting work in the tech space, CAD, PLM, augmented reality across many different industries and brands. I like to say, like, give this little snippet, like, you will find our technology from 19 crimes to NASA, which is pretty darn cool. So if you want to know more about PTC, I'm happy to share that with you. We have about 7,000 employees across 30 countries. So it provides some really interesting opportunities for us to think about issues like we'll be talking about today. My pronouns are she, her.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Yes.
And I agree with Cheryl. This is a great view. And I'm not talking about what's beyond the windows. I'm talking about all of you here. So it's great that you join us. Thank you. I'm Javier Barrientos, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer for Point 32 Health. We are an umbrella healthcare holding company. Probably two of the businesses that you know are Harvard Pilgrim Health Plan and Tufts Health Plan. We have, about other 9 brands as well. And my pronouns are he, him, and you'll hear more about later once we start the conversation with Kameelah. So thanks again for coming.
Thanks, Javier. Gavin?
Hi, everyone. Is this, you can hear me? Okay, great. I'm Gavin Alexander. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am a lawyer, and I am the wellness director of a national labor and employment law firm called Jackson Lewis. I've worn a lot of hats in my career. Some of them are, I'm a past co-chair of the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association, past board member of the National LGBTQ Bar Association, and I currently sit on the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing and the Massachusetts Judicial Nominating Commission. Here today talking about the intersection of well-being, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we think about that from a leadership standpoint.
Wow. That's impressive. I can dig it. All right. So, so we, we're assuming to some extent there's a collective belief that these topics are important and at the very least should be given thoughtful consideration. Wherever sort of you sit on specific policies or practices, that there should be thoughtful consideration. But that gets really hard for companies to manage. And then to take that a step further to be advocates. So Javier, I'll start with you. And what are some of the things that you think just create the complexity around this holistically? in 30 seconds or less.
Oh, no, in 30 seconds. That's
Just
a big
kidding.
challenge. I'll take a little more than that. But, it's when you said complexity, I think, where do we start, right? What I was thinking on the way here is that the best way to frame this conversation is to understand that there's always been two cases for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, LGBTQ inclusion is part of that. And there is a moral case and there is a business case. And those two things don't always go together. And when it comes to business support for the LGBTQ plus community, it hasn't always been there. As far as I know, there were no corporate sponsors of the Stonewall riots, for example. And so the corporate support came in much later. And the first corporate supporters were driven by that moral case. They were doing it because it was the right thing to do, and they were taking a lot of grave risks in doing that. Later, we had more people join the movement, but they were more oriented towards the business case. And so what we see today is that, in the business case being that there is a market or a business return in terms of profits, or talent, or suppliers, however you want to frame it, or investors that you want to attract. So what's happened over time, or what I think is happening, this is my opinion, is that there is an organized opposition to diversity, equity, and inclusion in general, LGBTQ+, but we're also seeing it, in terms of race and ethnicity inclusion, and the parade is not going to stop there. It's going to continue. And the reason, and so what the opposition has figured out is that the way to subtract corporation support out of the equation is to attack the business case. So the corporations who had a shaky or no moral case conviction to come into this, who were just doing it because there was a business case, and they don't have a strong business case because now they have laws, and Gavin can talk more about this, that make the business climate difficult. In fact, makes businesses pay a price for the support of the LGBTQ plus community or for diversity initiatives. So those corporations are going to naturally hesitate, and we're seeing them hesitating, and they will most likely fold to the pressure, because the opposition using laws and other strategies is attacking hard that business case, is eroding it. And if you don't have a moral backing, then you're left with nothing. But I don't want to leave you in a completely dark place, because the one thing we know about the LGBTQ community, and I think Cheryl alluded to this in her opening welcome, is that one of our core distinctions is that we know joy as a way to pull through very difficult situations. And I think this will be no exception, So even while we are having a hard time, and we're going to have probably a harder time, I forecast, don't forget that, we've been through many, many bad things before, Stonewall riots, AIDS crisis, many things. And still in those moments of, very dark moments, there was always joy to pull us through. So don't forget about that. So you ever need a lifeline, pull on that. But hopefully Kameelah will ask me a few other questions, and we can come back to this topic. I'll leave it there.
No, thank you. Thank you for setting that context. Gavin, so if we sort of take this to thinking about our topic around intentional leadership, right? Let's start with, what are some of the things that you're seeing leaders do well in this space as they navigate all of the dynamics that we just walked through?
Yeah, I think Javier did a great job highlighting, when the business case folds, what's left. And you will, if you read some of the most well-respected DEI advocates and consultants, even the business-focused consultants. I don't know if any of you read Lily Zhang's work, but if you don't, strong recommendation. They're a non-binary, amazing DEI advocate. And they posted, I think either yesterday or the day before, highlighting that when the business case is sort of not quite what people thought it was, you have to reframe. And thinking about DEI, thinking about LGBTQ inclusion, thinking about BIPOC inclusion, thinking about you name it inclusion from a perspective of teamwork, from a perspective of what are the values of your company. And fundamentally, every company, in order to achieve any sort of market position that is sustainable, does need to stand for something. Like companies that stand for nothing wind up dissolving or dissipating into the ether because they never wind up sort of achieving some sort of locked in standpoint. Even Apple, for the gargantuan that it is, stands for what you think Apple, you've got an image in your head, right? They stand for that. Companies are starting to come to grips with in the I guess, what year is it now? 2023. In the 2010s and late 2000s, it was very easy for companies to just be like, oh yeah, we're on board. Yeah, this is great. Everyone's happy. Now we're seeing that diversity, equity, and inclusion can't just be, oh yeah, we're behind that. Great, we're done, right? We said we were behind that. So it needs to be more action-oriented. And we've talked about that at length, and I'm sure many organizations have. When it comes to leadership, when I think about it as protecting and empowering. The organization and leaders need to take a stand to protect those within their organization from themselves, frankly, from other people within the organization, and from dynamics within any individual office that can create microaggressions, that can create cultures where work is allocated only to those who look like or have commonalities with those in the majority, or they can step up and say, no, we're going to protect all of our people, whether it's through benefits, whether it's through culture change, whether it's through training, whether it's through you name it. And training, by the way, a lot of people have latched on to, everyone just does an anti-bias training and we're set, right? No. We need to think about things a lot more structurally. And I think organizations that are achieving successful leadership in this area are saying, we're not just going to think about this from a training perspective. We're going to think about compensation structures. We're going to think about work allocation. We're going to think about performance reviews and performance management. And we're going to think about how we as an organization protect our employees and then empower those who are experiencing, who are underrepresented, who are historically excluded, who are systemically oppressed, and who in this current climate are literally seeing their rights and livelihoods and lives being told they should be invisible. We need to step up and say, we're going to empower them by giving them the tools to succeed. Not just, we're literally about to hear the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action, right? If that goes the way, unfortunately, everyone's predicting it might go, then what do we need instead? We need to empower people to set them up to succeed, to set them up to get to those positions where they will be able to achieve and thrive at the top of their profession.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sort of pulling it back into really specific actions. Like if you spend some time with me, I don't do the bias training thing at all. You do it, but you have to do it in the context of what does this mean in this action as you're hiring, as you're developing someone? So in a moment that matters, as opposed to just sort of the standalone thing that happens out there and then everyone is magically better. And I've found too, just to sort of build on the leaders that I see doing the work well are very clear about their gaps, are very open to learning and not proving that they are an ally, but sort of learning about what that means, and that they're vulnerable with their own stories, and that they also factor themselves into the DEI story. So I'm talking particularly folks who find themselves in the majority, right? Instead of othering, they're able to find a point of connection without necessarily minimizing the distance that may be between, where they are and where this other person that they're managing or dealing with is. But it's being able to be part of the narrative, right, in it, so that they have some stake. There's a reason for them to want to do this, and it's bigger than just, I'm doing this because I'm a nice person, or we're doing this because we're a philanthropic company. Is that we're doing this because it really matters to us. Okay, so then let's talk about it a little bit. Like, what happens when you drop the ball, right? So you start doing the work and you sort of misstep, or you get hesitant because you get a little bit afraid, or you don't want to put another statement out because you're like, well, we've talked about all of the issues every week, and maybe we don't send out any statement this week because we're tired of it, like, or people are tired of hearing about it. So when you decide to start to like temper your passion and commitment to the work, what are some of the pitfalls there? And either one of you can jump into that.
You go.
Okay. Pitfalls, performative allyship, right? It's the number one, and we're in Pride Month, aka Rainbow Capitalism Month, aka slap a rainbow on it and you're done month. I think that is the biggest error, the biggest issue.
Well, I have a question though. So this one is always a little tricky because we say that, but I've been doing DEI for like more than 2 decades. And if you don't do that, you also like, I have ERGs, I'll be like, what's going on? So it's tricky. So let's unpack that a little more.
Yeah, but it goes back to the thing you just said before that, which is action beyond words. So if it's just words, if it's just a rainbow, if it's just a logo, it is meaningless. If it is just and particularly egregious, and this happens to this countless companies, I cannot tell you how many companies I hear about doing this, will issue like a public LinkedIn post talking about how great it is that it's Pride. Here's a lovely rainbow logo and it's great, and literally not say anything to their own employees. That isn't just performative allyship. That is exploitation, because it's literally saying the value we place on you as a community is the PR value we can achieve by publicly advertising about you. So performative allyship is a scale, right? And on the one hand, we have exploitation. And in the middle, we have well-meaning statements. Like genuinely, we're trying to issue statements where it's talking to our own employees first, then we're talking publicly, all of these things. And that can be meaningful if the words are said well. And frankly, from my perspective, again, it goes back to empowerment. Is the leader just saying the same words over and over? Or is the leader saying, hey, leaders of the Pride ERG, do you want to issue a statement company-wide with my name at the bottom saying I support this? Do you want to step into the leadership perspective? Do we want to find, and this is something I will talk about till the cows come home, storytellers within your organization? And it doesn't always have to be the top. It can be the top folks empowering any level individual to step up and tell their story and show how it matters. So that's, I think, a way to avoid performative allyship that is still like, we're issuing a statement, we're saying words, and sometimes without action, but even the action of empowering someone whose perspective may not otherwise have made it company-wide. That is an action in and of itself. Obviously, the dream is they actually, talk about all these structural changes and cultural changes and public advocacy and legislative advocacy. But the thing you don't want to exploit. You don't want to just have the same people saying the same pretty words over and over with no meaningful change. You do want to empower. You do want to create change.
Yeah. So I would take this conversation more from organizational perspective and how you drive change in our organization, and you need to think about and it's not an either or. I think you have to have you need to have that kind of outwardly support and marketing and fund space to keep people. It's like a lubricant, right? It's like a balm that makes the daily grind a little bit easier. So I would never suggest, taking that away, because then, if you take that away, then you really, are going to create a lot of friction from both ends. And that's our job. I think, as heads of diversity is more than anything is to shed light into situations rather than create heat or friction, because that light is really what drives the change, So when you think about that change, think about it at the individual level, at the team level, and then at the organizational or system level. And the climate that we're living today requires a lot more deeper thinking. I agree with you, Gavin. You can't just get used to the times that we're living and the times we're entering demand more thoughtfulness and more radical action. But I think the action has to come more from those systems and understanding back. You need to take your organization, PTC, Point 32 Health, Jackson Lewis, and you need to backtrack from who are the ultimate, and work backwards from who are the ultimate customers here, who are the beneficiaries or the shareholders, and what is the case that needs to be made to support, our talent, to support our vendors, to support our consumers, and amplify that message and that awareness of that connection to the business, to that external environment very clearly. At the same time that you're working the bottoms up, which is you're working from the inside by keeping your workforce engaged and contributing and attracting great talent from all backgrounds. But it's as it's very tough because on the one level you're doing changing systems and strategy, and on the other hand you are trying to change hearts and minds of people like us, people like you, and so it should never be like either or. You have to do both things.
So you both kind of sort of hinted at something. I just wanted to bring out that the work does flow internal and external. And I found that sometimes it's the external work that's not just sort of performative, but when you see inclusive actions showing up in product design or in marketing, because it's an understanding, a direct understanding of how that impacts the markets that companies are going after. Sometimes that work actually helps fuel the internal work, right? And then, ideally, the more diversity and intersectional work you have internally, that sort of fuels the product that you're able to produce. But it's an interesting dance to say there's some companies that are doing amazing things out in the world for the LGBTQIA plus community, and internally you're like, that's your benefits policy, what's happening? So this is
the opposite.
Or the opposite, right? So this is disconnect between that piece, and that's something that I'm always championing, that the work it covers every aspect of the business, and you try to get in whatever avenue that you can.
One thing about the performative piece, what I think is going to happen. I agree with you that there has been a lot of performative allyship over the last, maybe since the 2010s, as you said, over the last decade and a half. But as the stakes go higher and the risks go higher, you can see a lot of that individuals and organizations that are being performative, they're going to get alligator hands.
Right.
It's the Budweiser, the Target of the past 2 months.
Yeah, right. So you're going to see those people disappearing, and that's not necessarily bad, because it really allows you to see more clearly where your true allies are, and a time to reconnect and rebuild those relationships.
Yeah, but we do know it's like there are very few companies that are just purely going to always be in the right. There's always a little push and pull and tug, and maybe it's sort of this part of the company that's needs to operate or wants to operate differently, while the others, can still be advocates. But it's really hard to find companies through and through that will stand by at the very edge of advocacy all the time.
Correct.
Right? Okay. So this is actually an interesting transition, because we wanted to talk a little bit about how this plays out across sort of a local, regional, national, global scale, right? And this is that push and pull of where you pull back, and that dance you definitely feel as that works. So let's start maybe with the regional perspective, Javier, around sort of how does this play out for you? Yeah.
I think what we were talking right in preparation for this panel is that there's different levels here on how this situation affects different parts of the globe, different parts of the United States. We happen to be a New England, Point 32 Health happens to be a New England-based company with most of our business here in New England. So in a way, for us, I was talking with my CEO, Ken Hayes, last week, And he was saying, we need to double down. This is our opportunity even to attract more talent or drive more attention to and shore up our reserves in New England. We should not take it for granted, though. Like even in New England, we see, demonstrations of great intolerance and attempts to kind of push us back into the closet or roll back diversity, equity, and inclusion. And just this morning, I was talking with two fabulous women who are working on housing for elder LGBT folks, and their project here in Hyde Park, was sprayed with graffiti that said, "We wish you a slow death."
Yep.
So here, right here. So don't assume that this is only going to be happening way in the South and in Texas and in Florida. If we don't remain vigilant and we don't take action, it will land right here. But for now, let's say regionally, to us, this is it could be a blessing because, if there's any place just in the United States where LGBTQ folks can feel welcome and still feel safe is New England, I would say in Massachusetts. And in our case, we have launched a whole LGBT care program with our health plans that we're piloting this year. When the decision on the Roe v. Wade came about, we were one of the first set of health insurance companies to offer healthcare benefits to people outside the state, that employers could fly women here if they needed to have the care that they can't get in those states. And so there is a silver lining, so to speak, for regional businesses like ours who are in New England. I think that would be very different from
other things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say, and then I think the call to action for those companies that are doing great work in the space and can be sort of like a hub for folks coming is to like double, triple, quadruple down into the work and get really into the intersectional work too, because, you've got sort of like, if it's good for some groups, you start layering on other dimensions of diversity and it's even harder or just not really understood here. So there's space for companies like yours to like really do a deep dive on people's disabilities and race and ethnic minorities and all of that other work as well. Yeah. So let's expand it a little bit wider to national.
Yeah. So so first off, I wanted to very quickly touch on a local point that I thought you highlighted really well, which is that here in Massachusetts, things are definitely getting better, but they are in no way perfect. And Massachusetts has a very recent history of being extremely problematic from a racial standpoint, from a socioeconomic standpoint. And from my perspective, we are just on the cusp of starting to see that change. We have Andrea Campbell, a Black woman, as our Attorney General. We have Kim Budd, a Black woman, as the Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Supreme Court. We have Maura Healey, the first lesbian elected governor here in Massachusetts. So we are starting to see change at those top levels, which is going to create sort of buy-in and trickle through the entire system because they are hiring the people directly below them, appointing into the commissions. And blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I think here in Massachusetts, things are starting to change. I could say one of the projects I led with the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing, which is a really long name to say a lot of times, is we wanted to say, though, that this isn't issues that just affect some deep red state in 20 years ago. 2.5 years ago, we conducted a project where we met separately with members of each affinity bar association. So the Black Lawyers Association, the Hispanic Lawyers Association, the LGBTQ Bar Association. Separately, we met with each of them to hear their lived experience of being attorneys from those populations here in Massachusetts in 2020. And those stories were heartbreaking and staggering and appalling. And we published those stories as a report to the courts and to the legal industry here in Massachusetts. And all of these law firms and legal organizations were like, oh my God, how could this possibly be the case? And everyone in the community was like, yeah, that's what we've been living with. So now you're going to listen to us. And so I think here in Massachusetts, there has been this image that everything has been perfect and there's no more racism and there's no more homophobia, but it's it's not true. We're starting to listen. So transferring that to the national level. My law firm is in over 60 offices, 60, in pretty much every state. And I can tell you, 4 of the states that we have the most employees and the most offices in, on the one hand, New York and California, on the other hand, Texas and Florida. Those are literally our top 4 states in terms of employee count. So we're stuck in the middle when it comes to that perspective. So a lot of what we do, and we are a labor and employment firm, we try to advise our clients on what the law is. And that becomes complicated when you feel the need, or when people are saying you have to sort of advocate for what the law should be. That's tricky for law firms. Some of them are in a position where they can sort of take that risk, go out on a limb, but some of them get stuck when they do so. And law firms are risk averse to the high heavens. And none of them wants to be out on a ledge alone. So they'll possibly all work together to get there at some point.
I think somebody resonated with your message.
So that being said, so if we can't sort of at all times be advocating for what the law should be, what we can do is continue to focus internally and continue to say, what are we ensuring that our benefits plans are as inclusive as possible? Are we ensuring that those who feel in any way unsafe or unrepresented or unheard have the opportunity to be heard internally, to move up to positions of leadership internally? And if they do not want to be in the region they're in anymore, are we going to help them transition to a location where they feel safer? One of the really interesting things this year in particular, a lot of you are probably familiar with the HRC Corporate Equality Index, the Human Rights Campaigns. It's the, if you've ever heard of the top LGBT places to work for, that's where that comes from. For decades, it was a rubber stamp. It just asked are you nice to your queer people? Yes, great, awesome. You get a top places to work. And they asked more than that, but they literally just asked the questions. They asked for no proof. This year, they actually asked on nearly every benefits question for proof. They asked you to share, every organization who signed up for this had to share their actual benefits policies from their health insurance plans, from their policy handbooks, from their language. And I can tell you half the law firms out there try to gather together and be like, please don't make us do this. Will you accept an affidavit that says we do it? And it wasn't even because they were trying to hide anything. It was just, again, risk averse. They don't want to have to disclose all this crap and make it go through all of the process of being double checked, triple checked. But I can tell you, as one of the people in the firm who was doing all the double checking and triple checking, because for the first time we had to share this information, we found a lot of stuff that we've been telling people what our benefits were, but when we actually looked at the text, that's not what it actually said. So this was a really great opportunity. HRC sort of forced us to go in and look at everything and go, oh, we can improve here. Some organizations now are probably going to get dinged real hard on that survey and not be able to get that top LGBT places to work for. I think there's an argument that public sector employers in Florida or Texas cannot achieve a top LGBT places to work because of how the law is now in effect. Interesting to think about. But organizations like that have historically been just sort of yeah, everybody gets a hooray, everybody's equal and queer inclusive. If those organizations start adding teeth, start demanding to see the backup, and it's not just them. If you're in the law firm space, we have Diversity Lab, who runs a program called the Mansfield Rule, which actually sort of requires organizations to go through and prove that when they're evaluating a candidate for promotion or advancement to partnership, 30% or more of the population that is meaningfully considered for that role has to come from an underrepresented population, and they will go in and double check. So when these organizations are starting to go in, double check your work, I think that's how a lot of organizations are going to be sort of put under the spotlight of having to change. And it's those external observers that we need to see. And this gets back to your point, Javier, whether the business will follow, does the business and the talent, will top LGBT places to work attract the best talent and attract the consumers and the best clients? If they do, then those metrics will continue to matter. I think they will, because the younger generations entering the workforce right now are even more aggressive in asking what the support services are, in asking what these rankings are and how they're established, and demanding to see the receipts, as it were.
How does it look like for you? Because you do globally, right?
Oh, I like you're asking me a question. Yes.
Global time.
So I've worked across a few different global organizations, and I think Gavin, it might have been you that talked about being really clear on your values as a company. And a long time ago, one of my mentors in DEI shared with me that we are not in the business. We hope we can potentially sometimes change hearts and minds, but that's not the business that we're in. We're in the business of changing behavior, because when you work for an organization, they're renting your behavior. And so their expectations, and that's, and then hopefully other things come along, but you can't guarantee, that's just a hard road. So if there's behaviors and values that you set as your core, then you should try to hold true to that across the virtual walls, across boundaries and barriers and geographies to the best that you can. So I've worked for companies with offices in Singapore. PTC has a couple hundred employees in Hungary, and I don't know if you've been tracking it. The U.S. ambassador just gave a speech about what's happening there. And I've had employees reach out to me who are very interested in being out and open and supportive of the community, but it's a hot mess, right?
In Hungary is a model
Hungary,
that
yes.
the opposition in the U.S. uses is how they envision, the future. So I want to hear more about this.
Well, that's all I'm saying right now, because we're here. Yeah, I can't. But I'm just sort of throwing out all of these complex, or Singapore is really interesting where you can celebrate, but it depends on where you do it and if you're based there or not. So largely what we've had to do internally is most of the activities are led by employees. So it's really hard to say, as a US based company, we're going to do this event to you, because you might get people who buy into it, but you might get a lot of resistance. But if it's coming from employees there, they're smarter about how to navigate the internal politics, right? So it's we will fund whatever you want to do. We also really try to find in region guidance and consult and support. So going back to Hungary, we just connected with an organization there that's working with a lot of brand names that you all have heard of, and they're doing sort of a survey on the LGBTQ plus climate and how to sort of start to create a space for this work and benefits and all of sort of the things that they want to be able to change and support. And so there's a group of a sort of a network of support across folks who are trying to do the work in that space there. But I think it's really been country-led, employee-driven. It's going to change and look different as you go. Sometimes the messaging needs to change, right? So if you want to send a blanket message across, you might have to tweak that a little bit, and make sure it's localized and read by someone in region as well. And then you also mentioned sort of creating ways for employees to transition or move if they need that safe space, right? So if you really hold to, these are our values, we are an inclusive organization, be prepared to stand behind that, right? So you might have to help relocate an employee, or you might have to think about how to get them benefits or relocate them for benefits, right? This came up when we were talking about Roe v. Wade, even just within the US, right? So it's those kinds of programmatic things, but also real policy things that make this super interesting. And the hardest part is that in a lot of regions, it's changing, but in a lot of regions, it's hard to get data. And the data will lead you to be able to create policy and programs. So,
and it could be unsafe to gather data.
It could be right.
Let's do a test here. How many of you believe? Raise your hand. That is a good idea for companies to collect information on LGBTQ plus identity.
Collect or self-identify?
Collect.
Right, right, exactly.
Self-identify, which allows the company to collect. Okay, some of you, right? But imagine that if you were in a state where now it's becoming dangerous to be out, it may...
Doesn't matter what we say, you're not going to believe that your data is safe.
Correct.
Exactly. Because, it's the same thing that happens in the global stage, right? So like even you as a company, if you wanted to have that data to prove the case to your own company, you can feel safe asking for self ID, because you could be putting people at risk. And that's the kind of the climate that we're entering now. We need the data, but at the same time, collecting data puts you in this bind, because it could put people at grave risk. And so how are we going to navigate that is going to be interesting.
So that's an interesting point too. So that makes it even more important when you do have employees who step up, especially in countries that it is dangerous for them to do so, that there's extra precautions in thinking about how to support them. Because now they're like not just self-IDing, right? They're
states.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So we have a couple of questions to sort of wrap up here, and then we'll move to Q&A. I think there are a couple of people have some questions here. So we talk a lot about allyship. We throw all these problems out there, and then we're like, allyship, which is good. But there's also, we know there's a history of self-advocacy that has really driven much change. So, Gavin, I want to start with you, as LGBTQ plus professionals, as leaders, as folks who are in that community, what advice do you have around being self-advocates in the work?
I'm pulling something out because I actually just saw a fantastic quote on the way over here that I wanted to sort of share about this. So first off, we talked, and this gets to my point. You talked a little bit about data just right now.
Yeah.
Data is important, but it only goes so far. From my perspective, you also need to change emotion. You need stories. You need humanity. Data is really important, but on its own, it's just like, oh yeah, that seems rough. It doesn't do, like, people will be like, oh yeah, that seems rough. Oh well. It doesn't become real until it has a human face on it. I'm a big fan of when I do any sort of communication strategy, it is specific, substantive, and human. Those are my three pillars. So this is from a Black queer activist who posted shared an article specifically yesterday, called "My Pride is Black, My Juneteenth is Queer." Activist named Preston D. Mitchum. If you ever are looking for a queer intersectional speaker or DEI consultant, strong recommendation. I've worked with him a lot. His article highlighted, quote, "LGBTQ people are not political wedge issues, but real people with real experiences. Our stories intersect not only across struggles, but across the landscape of American history and our united future." So I want to share that quote to highlight that when we are thinking about what we're going to do about this, it can't just be data collection and metrics. It also has to emphasize the humanity of how your organization's communications, how your organization's strategy, how your organization's internal policies, benefits, culture, you name it. How are they affecting the actual human voices and lived experiences at your company? When I talked about that Supreme Judicial Court Standing Committee project, it was about amplifying lived experiences. Because with a human face and a lived experience, it's really easy to poke holes in data. Frankly, if you want to argue against data, you can come up with an argument against nearly any survey or data you can come up with. It's really hard when someone's looking at you and saying that data collect or self-ID is a great example. I saw one company that the senior, top level leader in the organization all but instructed everyone to self-identify, which was well-meaning, but had the adverse effect of basically saying, out yourself to the company so we can sell it to our clients. And so when that happens, if a person comes to that, or a group of people, even better, an employee resource group, has a meeting with that leader and says, this is what you did to me. Not just this is what the data shows, not this is what the metrics show. If a human face and a human voice can say, I was really hurt by this, and I'm considering going to another company because I want to feel safe. That's a huge game changer compared to just having data. So I strongly encourage you, it goes back to storytellers. Find folks who are capable of self-advocacy, who want
How about
to be
storytellers who use data?
Sorry?
How about
Well, storytellers
data?
can use data, but I mean, talk about combining skill sets.
This is another panel.
I have seen maybe like 3 speakers ever who are really exceptional storytellers with data.
Yeah.
So, I totally get your point, Gavin, but I'm gonna disagree a little bit.
Sure.
It's not a bit of none of these things should be like false dichotomies of like either or.
You need both.
So you need to have both of those things. Don't ever, rely just on the emotional case or feeling good about something. You better have some backing because, we would do this work for a living every day. No executive team is going to believe me if I just go there with a bunch of compelling stories, if they're going to have to make a substantial financial investment, right? They're gonna want to see. So,
well, I think it depends. There are many different kinds of influence.
Yeah. You need to have both.
So some people are influenced by storytelling, no matter what data you show them, and some people need to see. Well, storytelling actually is data. So, yes, you're both correct.
Yes. Yeah. The point is, you need both. Don't lose one without the other.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to wrap this last question. Let's start with you, Javier. So we talked about like self-advocacy. And the next question is around, part of us being able to make change is being in positions of leadership. And it can be hard to get into those positions of leadership. So what advice do you have sort of for stepping up and into roles or having a voice when you can't get a seat at the table?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, this is a thing that I've been thinking for a very, very long time. And one of the things that I didn't share at the beginning, I've been doing diversity and inclusion just like you for a long time, but I have quite a few things that I've done in the past. I created the first corporate women on boards program, which today has led to, substantially closing the representation of women in corporate boards. The first Black and Latino leadership program, which is run out of the organization here in the life sciences called the Partnership. But as I thought about the work that I've done there, I noticed that there's really a situation with the LGBTQ plus community. There is really no strong corporate leadership program that helps people embrace their identity and be out queer leaders. And when you look up, even, there's not that many people on corporate boards or in executive teams that are out and proud. And so for those of you, which to me look very young, I think, it is your role to think about that, to want to fill that void and not to opt out, because a lot of the kind of younger people that I come across and I mentor that are in their, their 30s, 40s, which would be the prime people to take on those leadership roles, they usually opt out. For various reasons, right? And I think, there is a cost that comes, a personal cost, but there's also a huge community cost when the LGBTQ plus community is not at the table, is not at that executive table, is not at that board, is not at that, important point of decision making to bring the perspective. And I'm working with a bunch of companies to fix that. We're going to, we're thinking of launching a LGBTQ plus leadership development program. Hopefully within the next year.
Well, you didn't tell me this when we did the panel prep.
Well, it's an idea information. We have quite a, we have a few companies that are interested in investing and creating this. And I would say those are the companies, again, that have this kind of both the moral case and that business case for doing it. So maybe if you invite me back next time, I can tell you more about that, and maybe we can recruit some of you to be part of that program.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. And the only thing I'll add to this is it's funny because I have a very busy day. We're all busy. I have an exchange student who's like, whether she's leaving tomorrow. And I'm like, oh my God, I got a panel. I got stuff to do. And I got like 5 kids calling me and then I just saw the elevator open and people step off into the room. And I just was like, oh yeah, community. So the reason I say this is because stepping up in self-advocating, allyship, navigating this, holding all of this in your head, in your heart is a lot. And now we're saying the real way to make change is to continue to put more of yourself out there. And that is hard. So my other piece of it is just to find community and connection and network and support. And because it is labor, it is emotional labor.
Often unpaid.
Yeah.
And the reason why you have to do this, like leadership development in a group, and I know this, from the prior programs that I just mentioned, a lot of times when we launched, for example, the women's program, 15 years ago, people would say, why are you trying to fix the women? No, you're not trying to fix the women, but it's actually what you're trying to do by creating this program is that you're building a posse, a community that can support you on that leadership journey. And so you don't have to be the only person breaking that ceiling. You're breaking it with force because more people are going with you through that experience.
Yeah.
And if I can just also adding that we are in a system that is broken, right? We are in a system that is set up for those who are marginalized to continue to stay marginalized and to not be centered, to not move into those positions. That is the way our Constitution was literally written. Let's not forget. So if we're at that point, these tools are great for learning how to cope while we are within a broken system, while also trying to change it. So just keep in mind that we need to protect ourselves and take care of ourselves, especially this Pride Month 2023, when all of this, frankly, bullshit is happening. We need to take care of ourselves and acknowledge that we're doing what we can within a broken system and trying to change it here and there for the better.
Thank you. We could keep talking. I know, but Cheryl got up. I think, Cheryl, you got up to get the microphone so we could take some questions. Yes? Okay.
Great. Who has some questions? There we go.
Just one part.
And tell us your name and your pronouns, and then ask your question.
Thank you. My pronouns are they, them. I have a question and a comment. So I'm 23 years old. I've been an activist for 10 years. I'm born and raised in Pakistan. That's not by choice, being an activist part, I mean. I want to comment on your, when we talked about the data part, collecting data internationally versus nationally. I started social media in 2020, soon skyrocketed, one of the first person from Pakistan to have a big following on social media. And in 2021, I went in Pakistan to organize probably the first LGBTQ plus march, hold pride flag. My Instagram magically got vanished from internet. Not only that, my activist friends, all of them, some of them are teenagers, woke up to hundreds and hundreds of death threats. Part of it was algorithm bias. Part of it was government, the political backlash, of course. Now, when we talk about collecting data, that can be a very, very fatal situation for people, for companies operating in countries like Pakistan.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that can benefit people and audience in the US, but that data cannot, like, imagine working in a corporation, a law, bill gets passed, all employees get fired. What do we do then?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was just a comment I wanted to make. A question for you. We talked about a lot of important things. Exploitation, allyship. The topic here is intentional leadership. One thing we forgot to touch about, or maybe what you all wanted to was respectability politics.
Yes.
And intersectionalism.
Yes.
We talked about hiring underrepresented talent. When we talk about hiring underrepresented talent, let me give you an example of Pakistan. I come from a not so privileged background. All the people I meet in Boston from Pakistan belong to the 0.00001% of Pakistan, very elite, haven't lifted a glass because they have maids and servants in their background. When that data goes into your field that, oh, that is an underrepresented because that's a Pakistani person. How do we take intersectionality into that account? And how do we talk about respectable politics, which is another form of queer and transphobia? Because not everything is numbers. And yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts about it. Thank you.
That is a great question. Thanks. We are coming to the end, so we're going to ask you folks to answer and do your thing. Go ahead. Gavin, you're so enthusiastic to answer. You had to go first.
I was enthusiastic because I'm grateful you shared everything you did. I thank you. Thank you for the work you've done and the work you're doing. And I'm sorry that you've experienced what you had to experience. That's what I was enthusiastic about. In terms of the answer, I mean, respectability politics is entrenched in every discussion of marginalization, right? There is, even if we go back to Obergefell, the concept of should we be fighting for the right to gay marriage, or is that just assimilation into a heteronormative structure? So yes, respectability goes into that. Intersectionality, I think one of the questions you're asking, one of the interesting areas, and the AAPI community has advocated for this pretty strongly, is data disaggregation. You can't just ask, is someone Asian? Because Asian is 700 identities with 1,000 intersecting and overlapping identities. And exactly as you say, if you're only capturing Asian, then you could be capturing, for example, in Boston, the Boston Vietnamese community is extremely large and has an extremely different history, profile, background, experience than the Boston Chinese Japanese community. And so you have to be thinking about those things. So there's no great answer to this other than when you are giving people the opportunity to self-identify, one of the things I've advocated for is if you're asking like a racial identity question, you can ask the big categories. And then when you click one, add in a field that says, if you want to disclose more your specific ethnicity or nationality, allow them to self-identify as that as well, because you can continue to get a lot more detailed information that way. But you have to do it on a self-volunteer basis, because if you're pressuring, you get into all of the issues you described.
So what I'll say real quickly of a specific solution that I have implemented at a couple of companies. How you would see something like this come up is during the interview process. And so we have this concept that I've created, it's called distance travel. And so distance travel means that you could have two candidates, they could both be Pakistanis, but with equal resumes. But you also want to, in the interview process, get into how did they get here? What is the distance as these two candidates have traveled to get to where they are? And the candidate with the most distance is going to, have is going to come forward, right? Because the distance travel matters a lot, right? So it's very different if you're a Pakistani that was born with a silver spoon versus a Pakistani that had to work all this way up to get to that interview. That grit, that resilience, those are very valuable skills that any business would want to have at the table. And that's why we count that more.
I am so impressed by both of those. Did you have something you wanted to add, Kameelah?
No, I was going to leave space to either close or take another question. Yeah.
That's what I was going to do. So if we only had time for one question, I am so glad that we got yours. Wonderful question. And thanks so much for sharing your story. So we are getting to the end of our program, and I wanted to thank everybody for coming. And I have a few thank yous I want to make sure that we address. First and foremost, I want to thank PTC for being our host for this lovely event, for this lovely space, and for our networking afterwards. So a big round of applause for everything PTC does.
Thank you.
And I certainly want to thank our two panelists and our third panelist, who is also the moderator, for doing double duty. So thanks so much to Gavin, Javier, and Kameelah. Thanks so much for coming. What I love about tonight and what PTC has done for us is they've provided this wonderful discussion, which is really the beginning. And now we have a chance to network with each other and to network with our panelists and really ask those deeper questions, let the conversation continue, socialize, have a drink, have this wonderful food. It is really a wonderful opportunity for all of us. So I hope everybody takes advantage of it. Thanks so much to everybody. Have a great moment. Thanks. Take care.